This is Sybert signing in to Red Alert 3 on the map Infinity Isle with the yellow allies on the left side. This is Mates Vindies versus aiop, who I believe is from YZZD. He is a Chinese player, and it's of course great to see him in a game versus a European. But if you have missed it, I was kind of away. As you probably noticed, there was some content production, but the last couple of weeks, it did indeed lag out. And that's purely due to the fact that I was just busy doing other things. I was working, and of course I was working on a number of different projects which were not Command & Conquer, and oh, so close to locking down that combat engineer. But the Bark and Roar wars, of course, will be taking place, and it looks like aiop really came through in the last couple of minutes there. Does need to clean up that last dog before it gets back out of that locked mode. But yeah, it was pretty even, and then suddenly aiop just was smashed through and won pretty much that war. But at the same time, Vindy's going to be going for the classic, locking his power plants in with the walls, which is very nice indeed. Makes his base look nice and tidy. Drops down the second refinery right there. Timings are all on point, and aiop is going to be going for his war factory before super reactor, and it is of course going to be before that expansion. Will most likely be taking the land expansion, but some Soviet players do like to take their rear water expansion and then drop down their super reactor at some point, and of course go for a naval yard and then try to curb the expansion of their opponent. But really, if you go for Akula subs, you really need to make sure that you know there's a water expansion that your opponent has. You don't want to just throw that down for no reason, since lots of allied players do not go for that water expansion. Vindies does throw down the airfield, as all allied players will, and should be dropping down another power plant before his expand. But after that, bullfrogs do need to be produced. Two are currently out here, and the bear is going to be going in for the scout. It is going to be straight to the cryocopter, so this is very important for aiop to scout. He needs to get eyes on that cryocopter pretty much immediately. He needs to know what is going on. There's the Conyard out going for the water expansion. But here comes the Vindicator Cryocopter combo. 3 bullfrogs out on the field, and with only 1 Vindicator, it's not enough to actually start cleaning up those bullfrog numbers. A couple of flak cannons could get thrown down, of course. Unfortunately for aiop, he has dropped down. Oh, nice shrink there by Vindies. I didn't think he was actually going to get it in time, but of course you can shrink down bullfrogs and then kill them off with just 1 bullfrog. But aiop may be forced to go for some of those. Oh, the bear's so close to blocking out that refinery. He may have to go for flak cannons because he did sell off his barracks, which means no flak troopers. Of course, you can produce 1 or 2 flak troopers just to help lock things down in the air. And that Vindicator is pretty much close to getting actually, the bear did get locked down, but I don't think the dog actually did pretty much anything else. The Vindicator was getting a little bit, did still have a little bit of damage there, which of course is dangerous when going up again. Oh, that was a great bark for aiop. Very cost-effective bear right there. But you just want to make sure that your Vindicators are up to snuff, because you don't want to be sending them out into battle with a little bit of damage taken away. 1 Vindicator does go down, and this Cryocopter could be getting eliminated as well. Of course, the MCV had just got shrunk down, which means it's not going to be crushing any bullfrogs at this point. And of course, bullfrogs don't crush, so he doesn't have to worry too much about that. But that Cryocopter is going to be getting chased all around. May just have to hop over the ridge a couple of times to shake off the bullfrogs and force them to run around. But conscripts inside of the building going to be going for the harassment of that airfield, and the Tier 2 is now back in range of that airfield. We also could be seeing some spies eventually once the sickle gets cleaned up. Ooh, going for the Javelin Trooper. The bear shows up at the last moment there and gets the kill on 1 more Javelin Trooper. That bear really was a hero. Multi-gunner turret being forced to be produced, so aiop is going to be pretty happy about this. He does have his naval yard. If he has the super reactor, which he does, he could be going for Akula subs. They're rather expensive, but as long as you can lock down the ore refinery and kill the harvester, they are definitely worth it. If you don't kill the harvester, and then the harvester ends up just, allowing that refinery to be rebuilt quite easily, not too big of a deal. There is going to be the Akula sub popping out for aiop. But again, really only ever do this if you know for sure that there's an ore refinery over there. As you can see, he sells off the naval yard because that's quite a cost investment. Kula subs are not cheap. I don't remember their exact cost, but it's like 1,200 credits or 1,800 credits or something. One Vindicator does go down, which means this attack force was not worth it. If he would have lost 2 Vindicators, oh man, Vindies would have just been in a very bad position. Of course, this terror drone can go for the harassment. Vindies did wall up quite well, of course, as you would expect from a top level, well, maybe not top level, but a pretty much top level allied player. He's had his tournament victories, he's had his good plays. Vindies is definitely good enough to wall in his refineries versus a Soviet player. As I say that, he doesn't wall in his 4th expansion, but he does, of course, have the 2 that are on land that he can wall in, quite easily walled in. Kula sub moving in, and there's going to be the special ability most likely get used at some point. AIOP wants to clean up this refinery as quickly as possible, and that Kula sub special ability is just so great. Ultra torpedoes, wow, they really put on their thinking caps for that one. But then again, Red 3 was developed in a ridiculously short amount of time, as most Command & Conquer games were. Nice move there by Vindy's, going to be calling in that shot and just bringing... Well, loses the Vindicator, so it is still kind of worth it because, of course, Vindicators are cheaper than Soviet ore collectors, but it's not quite worth it as much. Needs to make sure that he kills off the command hub, because at the very least, command hubs can be sold off for 500 credits, which is a nice cash boost for the allied player. And at the very best, then then you get the build radius and you can rebuild that ore refinery. And the Cryocopter shows up at the last moment here. Probably isn't actually going to be enough to kill off the Akula sub. Will be forcing it underwater, but the Vindicator is now out here. And actually, there's a second Cryocopter, so Vindy's really wanting to lock down that Akula sub, but submarines are so annoying in that they can just go underwater, and then you have to just either camp on it with a unit and keep an eye on it, or you have to actually defend the front of your base. And Vindy's does have to be very careful here with his Cryocopters. So you got to roll in one at a time. Well, you don't have to roll in one at a time. You can roll them all in at once, but you got to roll them out one at a time based on which one is taking more damage, so that you don't lose them. You don't want 1,600 credits going down the drain like that. Some nice roars coming out here for AIOP, which is very important in cleaning up this infantry army. Hammer tanks should be crushing these units before they have a time to come back online. You don't want to be losing any more units than you have to, although once you eliminate all the peacekeepers, you don't have to worry about the javelin troopers doing too much damage to your infantry. That was an absolute smash there for AIOP. Vindy's isn't quite out of it yet. He does still have those 3 refineries, but as for now, AIOP is going to be in such a good position for refineries, and with those victories, cleans up 1. Oh my word, this is so close to eliminating these Cryocopters. He turns around at the last moment. They're not able to catch the Cryocopters. They're so tanky. And yeah, that was very, very close for Vindy's to just being a terrible, terrible situation. He lost 2 Cryocopters, which isn't quite impossible to come back from, but it just makes it a lot more difficult. As long as you've still got the 2, 3 is better. Oh no, he's actually still got 4, so wow, Vindy's has powered out an insane number of Cryocopters, a total of 6 so far in this game at least, maybe even 7 if he lost an additional one. But as long as he's got like 3 Cryocopters, he can do an insane amount of damage if he micros them well. Of course, if he ends up just like freezing down one single unit with all 4 and not doing anything else with them, then they won't be doing very much. But hammer tanks are going to be taking a little bit of damage here if they stop moving, but AIOP cleaning up the javelin troopers exactly as he needs to do. Those hammer tanks not really taking too much damage because, of course, in that shrunk down mode, they do not take direct damage for a while moving from javelin troopers and multi-gunner turrets. A lot of units, when they're shrunk down, are just too darn quickly for those rockets to actually impact. But now that the Cryocopters can actually start working away at some of these units, the bullfrogs are the main problem for Vindy's to deal with. Multi-gunner turret is not going to be good enough. He's going to be forced to sell off the refinery as well, but he needs to deal with the bullfrogs. He's got no armor, though. He never built that armor facility. He didn't even ever build a naval yard. So he's going to have to shrink down some of these units and then hope that he gets in the nice shots that he needs. But if he can scare away the bullfrogs, he can deal with the hammer tanks relatively easily. Not super easily because they are still hammer tanks, but a lot more easily. Oh, one will be getting crushed, but here are the MiGs to clean up a lot of this stuff. As you can see, 6 hammer tanks getting absolutely shredded there. Cryocopter's incredibly powerful as MiGs do clear the skies a little bit there, but it's only 1 Cryocopter. The terror drone does get the infect, but the airfield is definitely close enough to ward that away. AIOP probably would have been in a better situation if he would have brought the terror drones in earlier, bring in 2 of them, 1 for infect, 1 for the stasis ray. and then just keep it at a distance, protect it with the hammer tanks, and bring in maybe the MiGs a little bit earlier as well. Improper unit mix can be the downfall of any player, and in this case, AIOP went from a very, very strong position to all of the bullfrogs getting shrunk down, which means they weren't nearly as effective, and of course he has to be much more wary of infantry in that situation. I mean, bullfrogs are already pretty low armor, and once they shrink down, they just get chewed up so quickly. They're chasing the cryocopters away. One cryocopter does go down, the second one maybe getting eliminated, but the stream of infantry is just too powerful at this point. There's four bullfrogs still out on the field. One terror drone does get eliminated, and a couple of conscripts are going to be swinging on over here. They may have to switch to their AK-47s to actually do a little bit more damage here, and a couple of heroic peacekeepers mixed in here as well. Actually, an elite javelin trooper will be, yeah, that javelin trooper is elite, but he has to be very careful here. The Bears can be cleaning up some of these peacekeepers, as the cryocopters would be very useful in this battle. But again, you have to be very careful of those bullfrogs. Cryocopters are very expensive. The MCV gets shrunk down. The crushing ability suddenly negated heavily, as it is just going to be rushing down by the majority of this battle. A multi-gunner turret is queued up and ready to go should Vindies actually need it. But for now, the Bears are his main concern. The MCV is, of course, shrunk down and not doing a whole lot of damage. These hammer tanks may just need to back on up, although the multi-gunner turret did not have a peacekeeper inside of it, and thus it was not actually able to deal with those infantry very well. Nice cryo blast going to be, or actually I guess it was just a cryocopter, is going to be locking down that harvester and doing more harassment is exactly what. AIOP has to be so careful with his MCV. He's got to keep it on the move. He cannot afford to let it get locked down. Goodbye, Soviet MCV. Vindy's finding ways to make the comeback real, as AIOP is trying to focus down that one cryocopter. Will be eliminated. One may actually get an additional one as well, and now these Vindicators are just so effective in this game. Wow, that MiG is actually going to be going up to an elite status. Not something you see very often, but can he actually curb the tide of that heroic Vindicator? That MCV has certainly earned its worth in this game, as the MCV is now gone, and if you want to rebuild that, you're going to be locking up your War Factory's production queue for quite a while. Back up those hammer tanks a little bit there, and you will be able to outrange that multi-gunner turret without too much trouble. Vindy's being so annoying dropping down that multi-gunner turret. Of course, the hammer tanks do get a little bit of healing ability, but it's not that much. And of course, it does take a little bit longer to clean up targets with the magic beam healing ability, rather than just the main gun. It's like half the damage or something, or 1/3 the damage. It doesn't do very much. The Apollo is going to be engaging with the MiG, but that's an elite MiG. You may want to choose your targets a little bit more carefully here, as bullfrogs are going to have to be very careful that they don't end up getting caught out in the open away from the support units, which is very important for AIOP. But he's still sitting on 3 refineries. It's not fantastic. 4 is actually already established, but I did indeed miss it because it's down there on the water. Vindy's, on the other hand, he's back up to those 3 refineries. He really wants to be sitting on 4 refineries to match that of his Soviet opponent. Allies always like to be just at least matching, maybe even a little bit ahead economically, but Soviets do have some very expensive units, and it can be hard to produce them, especially with how powerful Allied infantry can be. And currently, Vindies is going for a pretty infantry-heavy composition, and he's been doing that all game, which is kind of advantageous just because of how cheap they are. One sickle is going to be getting potentially locked down. Was not able to get through that Cryogaddon as it does blast away. And again, it doesn't really do a whole lot of damage in this case, but it does force the engagement in an uncomfortable way for AIOP. There's the roars coming in here, and the crushes are going to be pretty darn great. The bullfrogs could have been a little bit more active in chasing away these cryocopters, as he has to make sure that he does not lose any more harvesters if at all possible. The Vindicator is going to be the target there for those MiGs, probably the best choice. And goodbye, Vindicator. What are you actually doing? Clean that Vindicator up. There we go. And it looks like everything went down there. So Cryocopter getting eliminated, Apollo eliminated, and also the Vindicator, a heavy strike force in terms of cost for Vindies, but he did end up losing it, and AIOP needs to make sure that he stays on top of this harassment. Of course, it's a little bit of a challenge to just eliminate everything before the Cryocopters show up. I guess Vindies could have actually gone in. Oh, that MiG, yeah, does need to be... Good move there by AIOP, forcing the MiG, or using the MiG to force the Cryocopters away. A good choice for him. Does need to make sure that he eliminates that Prospector. Again, no extra credits for the allied player. You got to stay on top of that kind of stuff. A couple of more terror drones getting produced by aiop, I think, would be a good idea. He doesn't need to go crazy, but maybe just keeping one in there in case he has to deal with any vehicles on the ground. He doesn't want to get locked down by an MCV once again. As we saw earlier in this game, the MCV, of course, can be very powerful. You got to have something there to deal with it, and a stasis ray from the terror drone can be a very good solution. Ooh, trading a Vindicator for a sickle. You know, Soviets do have some expensive units, but they've also got some cheap units, and Vindicators in comparison with sickles. Of course, the sickle is going to be the cheaper unit every single time. Cryocopter's finally going to be discovering this very harassable location, and this Cryocopter harassment combo is not really going to be stopped very easily, although this MiG is the perfect unit to deal with it. One more shot will eliminate it. Cryocopter goes down, MiG goes down as well. No Crusher Crane, unfortunately, for aiop, which means he does not have the ability to get those repairs. He did reproduce his MCV, which of course does take quite a while. Goodbye, Harvester. And he may just be forced to sell off that ore refiner. He may end up wanting to go for a Crusher Crane at some point. Looks like he had to sell off both his airfield and a couple of power plants to make way for that MCV. Going for the barracks as well. Potentially just for some extra bears, but also it could be for a couple of flak troopers. You have to be careful. Flak troopers are kind of expensive, as you can, you know, just produce a few too many of them, and then suddenly that's like, oh, I could have built a couple more tanks instead of five flak troopers. You know, which one is going to be giving you better utility? Maybe the tanks, maybe the flak troopers. It's hard to say exactly. It does depend on the situation. There's not a huge amount of air forces, though. So flak troopers going to be having limited utility. Bears going to be a better choice in dealing with this army. Of course, conscripts would be good just for the mass swarming abilities of them and just kind of their mess. They may not be doing a lot of damage, but they're going to be creating a mess, and that you can just sort of move them in and don't worry about them because they're just going to shoot stuff. They'll do a little bit of damage, and they're going to force your opponent to deal with them, and then you can worry about using your other units to do the real damage, and like using your bears to actually roar and lock stuff down, which is, of course, fantastic. Back to just those 3 refineries, while aiop is, of course, going to be sitting on top of those 5 once he finally gets that one back onto the road. But, ooh, Cryogeddon going to be utilized to lock down this expansion, and could just sell off the Tesla coil there. We'll be losing the Harvester and also the refinery if Vindies is quick. There's the splitting of the bombs. Should have sold them off, but he did get cash back for them, which is quite nice, and he got the reactor, which is very good by aiop. He now does have build radius. I don't know if that's quite enough, but he may have to throw down another reactor, and then once that's finished up, he can drop it down that refinery. As you can see, very nice use of the Badger Bomber support power, calling in the toxins. And Athena Cannon's out on the map. Ooh, a couple of Mirage tanks are going to be taking a lot of damage here. The Hammer tanks are going to be just leeching away those Mirage tanks' lives. And then after that, there's nothing to protect the Athena Cannon. I would like to see some Twin Blades eventually come out onto the field for aiop, but I have a feeling this game is going to be getting locked up relatively quickly here. 2 Cryocopters go down for no reason. Vindies is probably typing GG at this point. I mean, he doesn't have a whole lot left. He can still make a defense with his hammer tank, or with not his hammer tank, with his Guardian tank and the Athena Cannon, but at this point he's just getting everything trashed. And again, the MCV, if there was a terror drone here, they wouldn't have to deal with this in the same way. He could, of course, just lock it down, although I think a terror drone did spawn from one of those units, and Vindies is doing a sick amount of damage with his MCV, but it's not enough. Almost, he does get the crush on another one of those hammer tanks. If Vindies had, like, a few more units, he would have been able to hold that off with that many MCV crushes. He very likely could have held things off. aiop will be taking the win there for China, and again, this could have been a very laggy game, as that does sometimes happen with the great distance between Europe and China can end up happening, but aiop going to be, you know, taking one on the board for the Soviet players out there. There's not a whole lot of them out there, and they have to, of course, stand up for each other against the Allied menace. But of course, Vindy's playing fantastically throughout the majority of that game. Really great use of Cryocopters in a number of situations, but also just good use of staying a little bit active, but not going crazy with the harassment. I would have liked to see him either mix in vehicles a little bit sooner, or maybe go for something else other than just going for that kind of air heavy, but air infantry kind of allied composition that we see so much of, like the Peacekeeper Javelin Trooper, and then you mix in a little bit of Cryocopters, and then In this case, he did a pretty good job of keeping them alive, but in other cases, we've seen Allied players throw them away a little bit too much, and that ends up kind of selling the game for them. But Allied players can be very fragile when it comes to Cryocopters. Of course, Cryocopters are tanky units, but it's like once you lose them, you kind of lose your ability to be super, super efficient with your units, and then your units just drop in their multipliers, and they're not quite as useful, but that'll be locking up that game. I, of course, hope you enjoyed it. Going to be looking at some ME number 4 replays. Of course, I did live cast that with Fizzin, so I'm going to be cutting up that stream and then posting that, and then we'll be back to more VODs, or more replays, I guess, after that. But, of course, thank you very much for watching, and, of course, this is Sybert, signing out.